Hello, and welcome to Central Booking, where writers and readers are the authority. I'm your host, John Valeri. Today, I'm happy to have the opportunity to catch up with award-winning author Jane K. Cleland, who writes the long-running Josie Prescott Antiques Mysteries. The series' 13th entry, Hidden Treasure, releases on December 8th. Believe it or not, Jane and I first met while she was on tour for Consigned to Death in 2007, and we've never been out of touch. That book was a finalist for both the Agatha and Macavity Awards for Best First Novel, and has since been named one of Library Journal's 22 core titles for librarians looking to build a cozy collection. Two other Josie titles have won the David Award for Best Novel, and her books Mastering Suspense Structure and Plot and Mastering Plot Twists each earned Agatha Awards for nonfiction. Jane herself once owned an antiques and rare books business and is an expert in marketing and management. Additionally, she chairs the Black Orchid Novella Award, is a full-time faculty member at Lehman College, and mentors Western Connecticut State University MFA students. In addition to writing books. In Hidden Treasure, Josie Prescott is drawn into an investigation that includes a missing person and a murder, both of which appear to be connected to the contents of an old trunk that she discovers in her newly purchased home. As always, she uses her knowledge of antiques to solve the crime. Publishers Weekly gave the book a rave review, noting, "Delightful. Full of red herrings, the twisty plot builds to a satisfying conclusion, and descriptions of each authentication process are a bonus." Now, join us as Jane generously offers a candid appraisal of her storied life and career. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Central Booking. I am delighted to be in the virtual company of Jane K. Cleland this morning. She is the author of the Josie Prescott Antiques Mysteries, the 13th of which, Hidden Treasure, there it is out on December 8th. Hey, Jane, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, John.
It's my pleasure. When I was thinking about interviewing you, I realized that I have known you since the very first Josie book came out, and here we are, 13 books and even more years later, probably more years than either one of us would care to admit to, but it's one of the few series that I feel like, I got into at the first book and I've been able to keep going all along. Either it's things that I've fallen into that were already well established, or maybe, authors that have just appeared in the last couple of years, but we've been doing this a while now.
A long time, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. So I told you that I would start by asking, some questions specifically about Hidden Treasure first, and I won't spoil anything because it's a mystery and nobody likes it when you give away the ending. I've learned that.
Just one more. Oh.
Yeah, right. All the time, and then people don't like that. But anyway, of course, so Hidden Treasure, it starts with Josie and her newlywed husband, Ty. So they have finally tied the knot, if you'll forgive the little wordplay there. But they buy a new gingerbread house, and it's, not the cookie, though it is the time of year to be talking gingerbread cookies, but it's a gingerbread style house, and they're doing some renovations. And throughout the course of that, Josie, of course, discovers an old trunk hidden in a dumbwaiter and also some items contained within. And your mysteries always tend to start with, of course, antiques. So I was wondering if you can tell us about this trunk and what Josie finds inside and how that's sort of the accelerant for the mystery that comes after.
Sure. Thank you. The trunk is a dome-topped tin and wood 19th century traveling trunk, steamer trunk. And they were very common back then, and they were huge. Some of them were as big as 4 foot by 4 foot by even taller. Some of them opened sideways. This one had the dome top. And there are ridges that go all the way around, little wooden ridges up and down, like a bookshelf now, where you can actually slide the shelves in and vary the height of the shelves based on your own book collection. In this case, there came with 4 or 5 shelves, and you could place them based on your own choice. So when she finds it, it's like, wow, this is a surprise. Pulls it out, opens it up, and inside are 3 things. There is a stack of old letters bound by blue satin ribbon, and they're love letters. I won't say any more about it, about who they're from or who they're to, but I love that picture of a stack of 50 or more letters tied with blue satin ribbon. There's an old family Bible. And, you know, in those old Bibles, big ones, folio size, big, there's the family trees. It was often a wedding gift to a new bride. And the two families that are joining together, you get to fill in the trees. I think there's something very nice about that. And then there was a kind of old box, silver, a little bit gold, kind of hieroglyphic looking or labyrinth looking or something looking. And there were stones embedded in it that might or might not be jewels. When they opened that, there is a really scaggy looking cat. I mean, black and kind of not shiny and not nicely maintained. And imagine finding all that in a dumbwaiter. Talk about an odd start to a day.
A great start to a mystery.
Thank you.
And so, you know, I guess the next logical line of questioning would be about who that trunk belonged to. So Jane and her husband, they buy the trunk, but they buy the home rather from
Josie and her husband.
Josie. Who did I say? I said Jane, didn't I?
Jane, yeah.
I did that. No,
I
Josie.
know, little
I'm
alter
creating a whole
ego
backstory.
thing going on there.
Sorry about that, Jane and Josie.
All right.
So reset. So
I've been called worse.
that is true. You know, I've been called worse too. I would love to be called, you know, Jane or Josie versus some of the things I've been called in my times. But anyway, so okay, so Josie and Ty, they buy this house from a lovely woman named Maudie. And of course, you know, so finding this trunk sort of brings them back into orbit, and Josie develops a really wonderful relationship with Maudie, even though, you know, they're very new acquaintances, and Josie's not the type of person who's, you know, lets people in that quickly, but she feels a real kinship with Maudie. And then, you know, throughout the course of the book, Maudie actually goes missing, and I'm wondering if you can tell us, you know, about the relationship, why it strikes Josie as being so special, and then, you know, how it motivates her actions, because of course she's going to want to know what became of Maudie.
Thank you. And that's so insightful of you, John. I needed the woman who was selling the house to be someone Josie would relate to. And I actually had trouble writing that character. And then I remembered a woman of a certain age who was my ex-mother-in-law, and her name was Maudie. And I renamed the character Maudie. Easiest thing in the world for me to write, because I loved Maudie so much. She was so important to me, so special to me. She loved me for who I was, not for who she wanted me to be or anything else. And she was wonderful. And it was that kind of acceptance that actually ended up being a theme and drove part of the plot. This idea of not pretzeling yourself to fit in, but finding out where you genuinely belong.
That's great. And the Maudie character is so lovely. And, you know, getting that insight from you, I mean, I really appreciated her character, but now I can see why she resonated so deeply, because I kind of wanted to hang out with her. I think she's a
nice,
fun lady. And I have to ask you too, so she has a couple of nieces, you know, who are stirring up trouble. It's Celia and Stacy, and, you know, they sort of openly question Maudie's state of mind and whether she's really still together mentally. And unfortunately, they seem very invested in her, you know, for how they can benefit financially versus, you know, maybe emotionally or through connectedness. And then Celia has the misfortune, of course, of being bludgeoned. And so we have a missing person mystery, a murder mystery. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the dynamic, you know, that the sisters had with Maudie, and how that sort of shapes the course of the investigation and some of the beliefs that people have, given those very, you know, highly emotioned dynamics between the three of them and their associates.
You know, life happens, and we get ourselves in trouble, and we try to get out the best way we can. We try to show initiative. We try to do things that are meaningful to us, and it doesn't always work out the way we want. And what I'm about to say is probably an unpopular view, but I think over the years I have learned it is true. And that is that money solves a lot of problems. And, you know, without money, you don't have freedom. You can't, because you're just working to pay the bills. Excuse me. And so a lot of what the sisters, Celia and Stacy, are trying to do is buy freedom, buy their way out of trouble, buy options. And, you know, that brings us to Maudie. What is a rich woman's obligation to her nieces? Is it her job to make sure they have freedom and choices and options? Or is it her choice to do with her money what she wants? And if she's a little bit, I don't want to say hard ass, because I don't think she is. I don't want to say Calvinistic, because I don't think she is. But she certainly respects work and getting yourself out of your own trouble. Is that a wrong point of view? Or is it only wrong when it's coming at you?
Right. And there's a lot of deep questions like that that run throughout the book because, you know, she is very supportive of her nieces up to a point. And it really does, you know, raise the question of how we feel about, you know, things that we think we're entitled to versus things that we earn. So I really, you know, could appreciate sort of the subtext there. And another one of those underlying sort of motifs that I wanted to ask you about that I definitely noticed in this book, but, you know, I think is run throughout the series too, is the idea that family, you know, isn't just necessarily what we're born into, but also, you know, the people that we find and we choose to associate ourselves with. And I was wondering, you know, if you could speak to that and how that's played a part in Josie's, you know, making a life for herself in Rocky Point.
Thank you. Yes. The idea of finding community, that's the phrase that stays in my head, has always been central to the books. Here's Josie's backstory. She got caught up in a big price fixing scandal when she worked for one of the big antiques auction houses here in New York City. She was the whistleblower. And you know what happens to whistleblowers? It's not so nice. She got chased out of her job for not being a team player. She was haunted by feelings of, did I do the right thing or not? Hunted by the press, jettisoned by her so-called friends, except for one, Shelley. And finally, didn't, you know, was sort of at the end of her rope. And she was guided by her father's sayings. He had died, I mean, during this horrible period. And by the way, in Josie 14, which is the next book coming out, you actually learn about her father.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's, and I'm not saying anything. And, but his sayings really served as the beacon of her life. And one of them was, when you feel that you're in the end of your rope, tie a knot and hang on. And if you can't hang on, move on. So she hung on for about a year and then she moved on. She moved to Rocky Point, New Hampshire to start her own business for a fresh start, a second chance. And the juxtaposition of that driving motivation to find a place where I can be with the really rugged, hard living of New Hampshire on the rugged coast, the craggy coast. Winters are long. There aren't a lot of people. It's hard living. And I think that has made for interesting dynamic. She found her place and she did it the old-fashioned way. And by that, I mean, she joined organizations that meant something to her. She became a fundraiser for the nonprofit New Hampshire Children First. And she actually was fundraiser of the year, her first year. And that became a very important place to meet friends and connect with people. She is charming, and developed some relationship with customers that went beyond a sales relationship. She's a slow burn. You know, she lights the wick of friendship, but it takes a long time before that actually fires up.
Sure.
And that's okay. You know, there's no hurry for that sort of thing. But over the books, over the series, she's gotten closer and closer to the few people that she does have relationships with, and those relationships have strengthened. But you know, if you're not religious, which she is not, and you don't have children, which she doesn't, it's hard to meet people, right? Because those are the two ways that most people merge into a new community if they relocate. And she did it anyway. Go, Josie.
She did. She's a real go-getter. I love Josie. And the more I read about her, I mean, it's great to follow her through all these books and years because there is a real progression there. And I did want to ask you about that because, you know, this is a long-running series now, 13 books in, and I think some short stories as well. And, you know, you always manage to give a standalone plot, but there is an evolution of sort of character development. So I was wondering if you can talk about how you balance the two, because you have to, of course, satisfy your longtime readers, but you never know if somebody's going to pick up the 13th book and read it as their first. So that's always a fine balancing act, but I think you do it beautifully.
Oh, thank you so much, John. That means a lot coming from you. I think that's actually the heart of the dilemma of writing a series, is how you invite new readers in seamlessly at the same time as you keep it fresh and engaging. And I struggled with that early in the series. In fact, my editor took me out to lunch about that very issue. I think it was book 3. Josie's pretty upset when she gets to Rocky Point in book 1. I mean, she cries a lot, and it's very traumatic for her. And book 2, you know, she's got this business going now, but she's still just all fraught. So book 3, my editor reads a draft of the manuscript, which, by the way, I thought was the final manuscript, but I'm polite to myself in calling it a draft. Takes me out to lunch and said, "You got to tell Josie to get a grip." Isn't that funny? She says, 3 years now already. Come on, enough. Get over it. And it was like a little light bulb went off in my head. It's like, oh, she actually has to get over it. So I had to rewrite that whole manuscript. And that was one of the things I had to become much more aware of, is the evolution of the characters. And I'm actually, in the last couple of books, doing it much more dramatically. I think it's Ornaments of Death, Josie gets a TV series. And that would be book, can I look them back at me real quick? There are all the books on.
Of course.
So that is, I think, number 9 or 10. And she finds a cousin. And there are things that happen that are more dramatic. But at the same time, there's an ensemble cast. There are employees that Josie has worked with since the beginning. Gretchen, who started as her assistant and now runs the place. She's the general manager. There's the receptionist, grandmotherly receptionist, Kara. She joined a few books in. There's her second employee after Gretchen, Eric, who started part-time while he was still in high school, joined full-time as soon as he graduated, and is now facilities manager. There's Sasha, her chief antiques appraiser, quite quiet and reserved. And Fred, who she hired when things got busy from New York, who, you know, still wears his Italian slim fit suits and his cool kid square framed glasses. I love Fred. I have fun within the people who are known quantities. Their lives move on, you know. And Fred got a girlfriend, and then he got married, and Eric got kidnapped. And we learn why Gretchen shows up at the door saying, "Hire me. I'll help your business grow. Just trust me. Hire me." And Josie being quite methodical. So in a move that is not methodical at all for her, she hires her on the spot, doesn't check references, nothing. Does it just because her gut says do it. There's the reporter, Wes Smith, who is, when he starts, he's the eager beaver, reporter, a good breakfast for him is a double order of bacon and a Coke. Don't you love him?
What's wrong with that?
I was
No
going to
doctor
say,
anywhere.
isn't that normal? And her neighbor, her landlord neighbor and landlady and neighbor and now best friend Zoe, who in this book really suffers because her kids are grown. So that's the recurring cast, and Josie stays the same, although things happen to her and her life moves on. But she's as ethical now as she was the day she started the business. And it is her uncompromising, unwavering moral compass that really guides the stories. But I will say that one of the things that I'm rarely asked about, actually, and I'm always surprised because I think it's so weird what I've done, is some characters age and others don't. Josie's still in her mid-30s, but Zoe, who's also in her mid-30s, when we first meet her, she has little kids, and they're now in college and joining the Marines. And I mean, it's like, and it goes to show you how readers are able to suspend disbelief. And it might tickle a little memory, but wait a second, weren't they 8 years old a little bit ago? And they stayed 8 for a long time, and now all of a sudden they're out of the house. And I love that. I love that I can do that and no one questions it.
Yeah, I didn't even think to, but you're right. I'm like, they were just little school kids, and now one's gone and another one's leaving. It's wild. But I never actually thought, see, I'm going to have to go back to the beginning and say, she got us.
Isn't that funny?
For a good story, it serves its purpose.
And I got the idea actually from Rex Stout. I'm a huge fan of Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe books. And I'm very active in the Wolf Pack, which is the literary society that celebrates all things Nero Wolfe. We're the folks that give out the Nero Award and the Black Orchid Novella Award in partnership with Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. No entry fee, $1,000 if you win, and we fetch you at our annual gala in New York City in December. Go to nerowolfe.org, Nero, NEROWOLFE.org. Navigate to the Literary Awards. It's every year on a cycle ending May 31st. We welcome your submissions. So Mr. Stout, in his Nero Wolfe mysteries, people age around them, but the main characters never age. And he actually took it to an incredible extent. One of the early books, this is, I think, in the mid to late 1930s, is called Too Many Cooks. And Mr. Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, the two detectives, travel down to a resort in West Virginia where a famous chef is murdered. And they get help by some of the African-American help. And it's actually a story about the racial situation that existed in the 1930s. Well, now fast forward to the 1960s, and in the book Right to Die, Mr. Wolfe and Archie are the same age, but the African-American young man, who is a Howard University student, a college man, the only one among them who is a college man, is now a college professor in New York City and in late middle age. So it's 30 years later, and yet
he's the only one who's aged. I love it.
He's the only one who's aged.
Agree with that.
Yeah, it's great. And it was beautifully done without acknowledging it at all.
Right.
Yeah, it was great.
Well, you're so deft with your hand that I didn't even, I couldn't even appreciate that until you told me. And then the little light bulb went on and said, that's right. Zoe was a young mother, and now she's a mother facing empty nest, and yet she's pretty vital and hasn't changed all that much herself. And, I have to say, too, there was a moment in this book I really loved with Zoe, because you mentioned Josie's father before and how, his sayings have become very prominent throughout the books. And there's, of course, a toast that runs throughout, which is, to silver light in the dark of night. And in this book, it's actually Zoe who says it and not Josie. And I love that other people around her have sort of picked up those
have
things,
adopted it.
who were able to carry it through.
And that's actually a private little nod to Ed McBain. In the 87th Precinct series, one of the characters, Eileen, often toasts to golden days and purple nights. And I just love it. I don't know why. Purple nights. There's something about that so speaks to me and always has. And I wanted the same cadence. And that's what I did.
And every time
I nod.
I want to run for a glass.
I know.
You know better right now. I should start these at like happy hour time.
Well, first of all, it's happy hour somewhere. And second of all, that's why God made mimosas.
I like the bean food. This is why we get along so well. All right, so I'm going to combine two questions about the new book, because you can handle it. If anybody can handle it, it's you. And again, it's one of these things that you might not want to speak about too specifically, depending on how much you want to talk about plot points. But I did want to ask you, one, about the dedication of the book, and then two, something in the acknowledgments. So the book's dedication reads, "This is for all the people who've given me second chances," and that's sort of a thematic element throughout the book. And then in the acknowledgments, you include, a touching ode to the members of the United States military, and there's also, a secondary storyline involving military service that's included in this book. So I don't know if you want to speak to those points specifically, but I was wondering if you could tell us, why it was important to you in this book to acknowledge those two things. So, second chances, and then of course the service of our military people.
Thank you. In my youth, I had a lot of confidence, misplaced. And so I think I behaved in a way that implied I knew more than I did, and therefore alienated people who actually knew more than I did. And over the years, I have reached out to some of them, and they have uniformly, without question, welcomed me back to the fold. And I am forever grateful to be given the opportunity for a second chance. In the book, Josie's moving, in the series, excuse me, Josie moving to New Hampshire for the second chance was a second chance. Whenever she refers to her old boyfriend, she refers to him as Rick the Cretin. And that's because back when she was in New York having that horrible time being a whistleblower, and then her father died, and then 2 weeks later, Rick the Cretin dumps her because she's getting to be a little bit of a downer. It's like, that's just so horrible. And so she was, once wounded, twice shy. And then she found a second chance at love with her now husband, Ty. And there's a lot of second chances throughout the book. If anyone ever read it with that in mind, you would see a young girl. I think this is Deadly Appraisal. I mixed them up. I mix up the titles. I got to tell you, it might be Antiques to Die For, with a young girl who's now orphaned, and she's given a second chance with a family because a distant relative invites her into the home. But it's over and over again, and I have not always done it consciously. This time I did it consciously. So in terms of the military connection, there were two things that were going on when I wrote that. One is Paula Monier's first mystery, A Borrowing of Bones, is one of the most beautifully patriotic books I've ever read in my life. It made me cry. I tear up just thinking about it. Paula Munier, Munier, wonderful author, wonderful woman. And it made me realize, reading that book made me realize how much I admire and appreciate the sacrifices of our military. At the same time, in the last few years, I have felt like our military has been under attack from within. I feel they have been underappreciated, maligned, and it is utterly unacceptable to me. And so I wanted to purposefully celebrate their efforts and their sacrifice. Coincidentally, many of us authors who go to certain conferences are asked to donate something for a nonprofit charity that the conference is supporting. And it's often a literacy conference. And Malice Domestic, which is a conference that is annual down in the Washington, D.C. area, often celebrates Books for Soldiers, which is an organization. And I think they may now be doing literacy because this was before ebooks. When what they used to do is take flat rate boxes and stuff them full of paperbacks.
Right.
And send it to any soldier, sailor, airman, Marine who asked to their FPO address. And it just books for soldiers. Isn't that it's just a great idea. One of the things I gave was to name a character. And the winner was retired Commander Cindy Silverblatt. And she was a Navy person. And she gave me the vocabulary. She was so kind. And I asked her specifically the question, what would an empty nester, what would Zoe say to her daughter? I mean, she's just terrified that Emma's going to join the Marines. Who wouldn't be? What mother wouldn't be terrified? And I loved the retired commander's answer. She said, tell her she will have the best training in the world. I get so
Yeah, it was
much.
a great moment.
Because it's the US military.
Right.
And we do not set our military members up for failure. They get the best training in the world. She will never be asked to do anything that she will not be prepared to do.
Yeah, it was a great moment in the book, and it's funny because everybody's, struggling with what to say to Zoe, and then of course somebody who knows has the exact right line, the one thing that's going to mean something and resonate deeply. So that was really well done. And I would second your point about Paula Munier's books. They're incredible. And, it's so funny. Those of us, who haven't been in the service, but you read a book like that and you're able to appreciate something, in a way that you might not have been able to otherwise. And I think that that's sort of the incredible power of books and even fiction, because it sheds such an incredible light on a reality that we might not ourselves experience. And, giving the gift of books too, I have to say that it's an incredible thing, because I think we're all dealing, with this pandemic in very uncertain times. And the one thing that has constantly been a comfort to me is that at the end of the day, I can lose myself in a book. And I think that that's, such a powerful thing, and sort of be able to, revisit Josie. I mean, it is like coming home to a family and a friend, and there's comfort in that. So I wanted to thank you for that, because I've been thanking everybody I talk to, because it's really a beautiful gift that you're able to share with us.
Thank you so much. I end every newsletter that I send to people, I end it with, may you find solace in reading.
Yeah, I mean, it's the truth. It's the great escape. And, I think that that's, one of the things that we need right now. But anyway, to switch gears now that I've made us all
Now that
Clemson.
you have me crying. We definitely need that mimosa now.
I know, right? We should have. That's what we should have done. We should have done mimosas. We'll do that with your next book. We'll have a little mimosa virtual party.
Oh,
And
that sounds so good.
yeah, that would be lovely. But so let me ask. So people who know a little bit about you know that you are also a business person. You've been a business person. You've had an antiques and rare books business. How many times can I say business in a sentence? That's the question. But so obviously, Josie has some similarities to you, and you're able to draw on your own experiences to inform her character. And so I think a lot of times, we make connections that may or may not be true based on a fact like that. So I wanted to ask you, how are you most like Josie, or how is she most like you? But then on the other hand, what are the greatest differences between her character and your real life self?
Whew. Um, I certainly did not model her on myself on purpose. Um, I think she is more independent than I was at her age. I think she has more genuine confidence. I think she is better at reading people. I think I am naive in many ways. I'm a little gullible. I tend to see the world in black and white. And I have a very clear belief system about what's right and wrong, and absolutely no sense of humor of people who don't agree with me. I don't bear fools gladly.
Sure.
I think she's much better at bearing fools. That sounds terrible, but it's true. I get very impatient when I perceive that someone is not getting it, or it's doing the wrong thing. It's like, what words of mine are you not understanding? How can you be a smart person and disagree with me?
Put that on a t-shirt. I love it. That should be like the name of your next nonfiction book.
A memoir.
Yeah.
God. And I really don't mean to sound arrogant. I think I'm presenting these to you as kind of weaknesses that I've translated into strengths for Josie. Because I think that if you are able to listen more deeply to people, the things they say that don't agree with your belief system come from a genuine, deep place in their heart. And it may not be the issue. I think there are multiple layers, right? That someone says, I'm not going to come up with an example, but they say something that superficially just doesn't make any sense to you. What's driving it? What are the underpinnings of that? Because there may be something there you can relate to.
Sure, and that's another reason why I love these books and crime fiction in general, because unfortunately sometimes, people pass them off as genre fiction, whatever that means, but there's so much depth in subtext in the motivations of characters to do what they do and be who they are. I mean, you learn so much more about the world around you and things that you might never experience. So let me ask you, actually, I wanted to ask you in terms of mysteries, or maybe even cozies in particular, which I would say your books, would fall into that category. Why do you think that there's such a demand or even a fandom among readers for these books? And how are they, it seems funny to say feel-good books when there's murder and misdeeds, but really, by the time you get to the end of the book, you probably feel better than when you started it. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that and enlighten us in your opinion as to why, why these murderous, mysterious books can teach us and lift us up.
I call my books traditional mysteries, but they are categorized as cozies. And cozy, for your readers, your viewers who may not know, refers to the doily that goes over a teapot to keep the water hot. And it's a nod to Agatha Christie. When you think about Agatha Christie's books, they are traditional mysteries. And what that means is they are fair play mysteries. You know everything that is happening at the same moment that the detective knows everything that's happening, and you're seeing it through that person's eyes. When I think of cozies, though, I mean, when you think about Agatha Christie, so, right, there's a little old lady she's bedridden, and she is being slowly poisoned to death. And the only people who are allowed close to her are her companion of 25 years, her trusted lawyer, and her nephew. Call this cozy?
I know, it's really.
I mean, this is dark, right? So that's why I think the term is not, it can be misleading if you think that we're huddling with smiles on our face by a warm fireplace. Now, that said, I think that the appeal is the fair play, because it engages your brain in a very literal and logical manner, and the resolution in which you know that order will be achieved out of chaos. You're going to spend time in a sweet and decent place. That's another thing all these books have in common, whether it's St. Mary Mead with the Miss Marple novels, or My Town of Rocky Point. Now, Miss Marple had an opinion about sweet and decent, that human beings are human beings, and they're actually predictably evil.
Right, ask her about human nature, she'll tell you.
So, it's like, prick me, do I not bleed? We're all human, and yet there are problems, they get solved, and they get solved in a way that is acceptable to us.
Right, and I think you're right, because so often in real life, we see that justice isn't necessarily done. So it's nice to know that even if it's a fictional universe, that may actually happen the way that it should. And I did want to ask you too, speaking of Agatha Christie and teapots, I'm looking over your shoulder and I see a couple of Agatha awards that you have won for your nonfiction books, Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot, and also Mastering Plot Twists. So I wanted to ask you about that, because not only do you live a writing life, but you live a reading life, and particularly for books like that are just full of examples from other authors and their works. So I wanted to ask you, how do you balance, the writing and the teaching and having a life beyond that, with still being able to find, the time to read? And then also, I'm assuming that, to write a book like that, to write books like those, it changes the lens through which you view those books. So how has your relationship with reading changed, given that you have to look at it with a more critical eye?
That's a very interesting question, John. All your questions are interesting. The reason I started laughing when you were asking it is you said, and have a life beyond it. What I was thinking is, what makes you think I do? If you go to my website, which is janecleland.com, you will see the banner is Streetlights and Doors, because I define myself as a writer, an author, and a teacher. And authors illuminate, or we try to illuminate, and teachers open doors. So that's how that branding happened. Writing nonfiction is a very different process than writing fiction. And you're right, I read almost 200 books for each of the books that I wrote, and I did it in about a year. I started the process of writing Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot, which, if I may just say, if I can, I'm so unwomaned at the tributes. The book is recommended by Louise Penny, David Balducci, Dan Brown.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
Neil Gaiman. I just, my cup runneth over, Hank Felipe Ryan. It's just all such an honor. started that book to teach myself more about the craft of writing. Because one of my books, I already told you about the mistake I made where my editor said, get a grip. Another mistake I made is where I got interested in something. I don't even remember what. And I went off on this tangent of it. And my editor said, what are you doing? You know, you don't have a through line plot. It's like, through line plot. Well, that's an interesting concept. And so I had to teach myself plotting. And that's where I created Jane's plotting roadmap and what I call TRDs. Plot. If you think of plot twist as an umbrella term, under it, there are actually 3 specific techniques you can use that are all unexpected. That's the category that makes the reader go, ooh. A plot twist is unexpected, but not the opposite. It takes the reader in an unexpected direction. A reversal, that's T for plot twist, R for reversal, is unexpected and the opposite. And then the D is danger, moment of heightened danger. And that could be 2 guys coming in with guns, right?
Right.
A physical danger. But it also could be spiritual danger. It could be emotional danger. It could be mental danger, intellectual danger. And a book that uses all 4 kinds of danger beautifully is The Hatchet, the middle grade adventure survival story called The Hatchet, Gary Paulson. And it's a wonderful example of doing that. Once I had my plotting roadmap, it was like, okay, I actually understand how to plot. And now I need examples. And so I had to read a whole lot of books. And as I was reading, I found myself thinking, you know, this author is using setting as an unexpected twist. And this author is using dialogue to reverse what I thought. And so a book was born. And then the big thing in it, though, is plotting. And so that's why that was the genesis of the second book, which was Mastering Plot Twist, because plotting is actually very complicated. And in order to write well, I think you have to do it well. You know, Joyce Carol Oates once said, one idea is not enough to write a novel. You need more. And I suggest specifically, you need 3 ideas. You need your main through line plot, and then you need 2 subplots that are those secondary roads. And then you need how to weave them together at predictable times, which is how you control pace. And so I had to read another 200 books to find good examples of plotting and teach myself really the intricacies of the plot. It's so hard. It's so hard to do well.
I was going to say, it's a great way to give yourself an excuse to read, though. If you make it research, that's how you writers are able to fit it in. But I have to say, too, you know, after having read Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot, like, I read your books differently now. And it's kind of fun because I can say, oh, there's the roadmap. There are those 3 stories and how they converge and diverge and come back together. But it's fun to be able to do that, knowing that you wrote both, and then you can actually see how you apply it to your fiction.
Oh, that's great. Can I tell you one little happy story?
Please.
One of my students, I teach in the City University of New York at Lehman College, and I'm a member of the full-time faculty there. And one of my students was herself a teacher of 8th grade, so middle school, middle grade, special needs students. And uniformly, they hated to read. And she taught them the concept of TRDs and changed their assignments. No longer were they to read to a certain page or the next chapter. They had to read to the next TRD.
Oh, how great is that?
That so fascinated them, they couldn't wait to get in their reading circles and compare notes. And so that, first of all, that's great, right? She got them reading by using TRDs. The second thing is they almost never agreed on what was a TRD. And that's really interesting. In other words, to one reader, what is a TRD is simply not to another.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
It is. It's fascinating. There's another book.
Yeah, I guess. Stop it, John.
You should stop listening to me. Like most other people, they would have tuned me out by now. I'm making all kinds of work for you. All right, so I will let you go shortly, but I do have two more questions for you, if you don't mind.
Of course.
I was going to ask you about teaching, and what can be taught versus what's intrinsic, but I'm actually going to let you tie that into my next question, because I think that you'll be able to as both a writer and a teacher. But people are always looking for advice. And so what I've been asking people is, in terms of a creative life or a writing life, what is the best advice that you ever got, but then also the best advice that you never got and had to learn for yourself that you would like to pass on to others?
Oh, I offer free monthly webinars. And if you go to janecleland.com and navigate to the events page, you'll find them. You got to register, but they're free. It's one Saturday a month from 1 to 2 Eastern time. So in other words, these are all in the craft of writing or some aspect of the business of writing. And I have a lot of information, a lot of materials I've gathered over the years. The first thing I can say about what writers have in common is I would say that all of us are innate storytellers. We're born storytellers. And I think that is part of the human condition. I think from when we were fighting lions, tigers, and bears and scared of what was outside the cave at night, if we were lucky enough to have gathered wood to make a fire, one guy stayed up at the door guarding us to alert us for danger. And another guy told us stories so that we could all go to sleep. And by the way, those stories probably had happy endings, otherwise you wouldn't sleep. Just because we're innate storytellers, though, don't know that doesn't correlate to our knowing enough about storytelling process to make us write things that will sell, that will resonate with other people. And that's where learning the craft comes into play. It was Hemingway who said, and I'm paraphrasing a little, never tell them you had to learn to write. Let them think you were born that way. There's no shame in having to learn to write. And I think everything can be learned. I'm a teacher. I think everything can be learned. But the best piece of advice I ever got was learn to love to revise. Don't ever challenge yourself to write it right the first time, because that's an impossible challenge. And if you hold yourself to that standard, you will freeze, you will become paralyzed. And it's unrealistic. Why do that to yourself? So that's the best piece of advice I got. The best piece of advice I can pass along to others is my XXX strategy. And it is on some level related to that first. I'm a perfectionist. I really want what I produce to be the best it can be. But I'm also forgiving of myself. I have no expectation that my first draft is anything other than a rough first draft. And I do love to revise. But I am always scared as I'm writing that I'm getting the story down, but I'm going to miss in the revision process how bad that reference was, or how convoluted that particular sentence was, or how wrong that word choice was, or how that description of the character is so trite, I can't stand it, but I don't want to lose the story, so I got to just keep on writing. Well, here's what I do. I type XXX, because those letters appear in no word in English. So when I'm ready to revise, which sometimes is in the middle of a chapter, I just don't feel like writing new anymore, let's go back and see what I can fix. If you do a Control F in Microsoft Word, but if you use the search function in whatever program you're working in and search for XXX, every one of them will appear, which means I am now reassured nothing is going to leave my office until and unless it's ready for public viewing, which is completely liberating. Now I can just write without fear. Oh, there's another book I should write, Fearless Writing.
Yes, you're going to be busy, like busier. All you need
Fearless
to do
writing is actually a good idea, I think.
it's a great idea. You just need to give up sleep, you know.
Yeah, well,
Who needs
sleep
that?
when you die.
That's true.
I don't mean that. I think
No.
sleep, I actually learned over the years, I'll give another tip if I might,
Sure.
because I mean, I'm very busy, but I'm also very productive. I'm very organized. I'm very focused. But one thing I learned is I need my sleep. If I get a good night's sleep, I can then operate at full tilt the next day. But if I don't get sleep, I can have bursts, but that's not enough to be as productive as I need. So I don't want to just sleep at all. Here's my other idea, because I learned this when I was, in order to teach at the college level, you need what's called a terminal degree, which is generally a PhD or some doctorate of some sort. In the writing world and in the art world, an MFA is considered a terminal degree. So I have an MBA, there's my business background, but I needed an MFA to be qualified for a full-time teaching job, tenure track, and got tenure, by the way. Yay!
Hey.
Most stressful thing I ever accomplished in my entire life, gotta just say. During that last period, and I'm going back more than 10 years now, but Josie 6 was due in May, I'll never forget. I was writing my thesis that semester. I was adjuncting something like 7 courses at 2 different colleges. And I was applying for these full-time tenure jobs, which are like 30-page packages tailored to each position you're applying for. It's not just sending in an e-form. It was incredibly stressful. Well, here's what I learned. I had 20 minutes between courses, which meant I could spend 10 minutes getting myself to the next classroom, getting my head around whatever I was going to be teaching next, and 10 minutes writing a paragraph on my book or in my thesis. Because 10 minutes is long enough to reread the last paragraph you wrote, tweaking a little, get your head back, and write a rough draft of another paragraph. Well, guess what? You do that 3 times a day. You've just written 3 paragraphs, which is a page, roughly. You do that every day for a year. Guess what? You just wrote a book. So I wrote Josie number 6 in 10-minute increments.
That's incredible.
It got terrific reviews as being the most tightly plotted book. I think it's because I had no time to do anything else. All I could do was just run through the plot. Isn't that funny? So those are 2 really good, practical, meat and potatoes, implementable writing tips that will help you become a better writer.
That's fabulous. And I'm totally going to steal that last one from you because it just goes to prove that you can do it a little bit at a time, because a little and a little adds up to a lot. And I have to tell you too, when you were telling me about your triple X strategy, I must have heard you say this at some point before, because whenever I'm writing something and it's not a book, it's usually a review or a profile or something, but I use 4 X's as a placeholder where I know that I have to go back and fix things. And that must be a credit to you, because
Thank you.
I came up with that on my own.
Well, you said you read Mastering Suspense, Structure, and Plot, and it's in
That
there.
was probably it.
Yeah.
All right, final question, and I'm sure you can see it coming, and you've actually already given us a little tease, but can you tease a little bit more about what readers might expect next from you?
The book is with my editor right now, Josie 14, and I'm not going to tell you what the pivotal antique is because we have not yet publicly announced it. But I will tell you that there are pretty stunning revelations about Josie's family.
Well, dun dun dun.
I'm not
Consider
saying
me hooked.
And it will be out next fall, so that's fall 2021.
Great. Oh, well, that's good. That's not all that far from now. And the nice thing is we had to wait a little longer to see Josie in Hidden Treasure, but now we're getting her sooner. So, and people now have time. They can prepare themselves. They can pick up this book because it comes out on December 8th, and this would be a a nice one to read, by the fire for the holidays.
It really would. And I must say, for anyone who likes, high school and up, I would say, it's completely appropriate as a holiday gift.
It is. And can I just tell you one more thing before I sign off? I have to say that one of the things that I love about this series, and that surprises me every time, because it's not, when you ask somebody, why do you like this book, they wouldn't probably often give this answer. But I love, in addition to the mystery, the antiques, that Josie is a businesswoman, and she's really grown, Prescott's Antiques. She has a television show, as you mentioned, but you actually get her insights as a businesswoman, and you see how she implements them in the business and how she interacts with her employees. And it's so fascinating.
Oh, that's great. And in Josie 14, another little hint is you actually get to see the recording of a TV episode. Yeah, TV episode for her show, Josie's Antiques. And I think that's fun too, to get behind the scenes of a TV show. A reviewer once said about the Josie series that I'd created a workplace where everyone wanted a job. That I thought that was such a tribute to her. She is so ethical and fair, and she's a mentor. She encourages her employees to grow into their jobs, make sure they have promotion opportunities. So thank you for highlighting that, because it's something that matters to me.
Oh, happy to. I know that Rocky Point is fictional, but if I ever found myself there, I would be looking for Prescott's Antiques, and I would probably be asking if I could work with the books. So I think that tells you the immersive world you've built. But let me thank you, Jane. It's been a real delight. It's always a pleasure talking with you. And again, I want to encourage people to pick up this book, Hidden Treasure. Again, The Great Escape. Jane has given it to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And Josie would hire you.
That's it for this episode of Central Booking. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss a thing.